Live. Greg. You're live.
Go ahead, Greg.
Good night to the Belizean people at home and abroad. Give me great pleasure to be able to sit with my virtual host, Miss Sharon Pitts, Mr. Rudy Wade, and of course, no other than Mr. Leonard Brackett. Tonight we are having our 29th edition of Belizean Affairs, and hopefully, uh, as educational purpose, we might be able to get across to many Belizeans at home and abroad with the immediate issues that are happening in Belize. With that said, let me pass it over to Miss Pitts so that she can do her self introductory. Go ahead, Miss
Okay.
Pitts.
Good night, everybody. I'm happy to be here again and to speak, have this part of, I like say, chook mouth conversation, education, learning and imparting, and trying to. I think the one thing we cannot afford is to be indifferent to beliefs. And I think that's the hardest thing to be. So that I am, responding to these gentlemen who have asked me to join in this conversation. Maybe I can't all the time, but definitely it's a privilege and it's a bit humbling that this forum, and that as Belizeans we continue to hold on to. And earlier, I was saying when Mr. Brackett said he missed me yesterday, was it that you said? Mr.
That's what.
Leonard, oh,
Yes,
he
that's what he
stepped
said.
his
Yeah,
side.
yeah. Step
I
out.
was saying,
That's what
no,
he said.
but I was teasing that I was down south, holding on to that part of the patrimony. So I expected it, so, so mother, yes, so I wish I made that kind of thing, no? So we enjoy, talking about beliefs. I do. We all do. And it's, anything to believe, the common love, the tie that binds, right? We don't might have all the answers, but we could listen to one another. And we try to cipher, right? And where we have viewpoints and perspective, we bring them forth. Sometimes it might look more vigorous than usual, right? Or sometimes when you stir that tea, you have to make it, sometimes you have to steep before you stir, right? Depending if it's fever grass tea or the red rose tea, the loose tea, right? They got
Yeah.
instant tea, but all of we know, the elders, and I mean, take the time, make the tea steep. So we're steeped in beliefs like good old bush tea or red rose tea, right? Uh-huh. That said, good night, everybody.
Good night,
I
Sharon.
thank you, Miss
Go to
Pitts.
Leonard. Then I'll start with. Go ahead, Leonard.
Okay.
You, Mr. Brackett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Wade, and thank you, Sharon, for being a part of our panelists tonight. And my name is Leonard Brackett. I'm a member of the panel. Um, we come tonight with some reasonable expectations and hopeful requests. And as a result, the chairman for tonight is Mr. Gregory Brackett, and he will lead us with the rest of the program. Again, my name is Leonard, and I'm a part of the panelists, and hopefully be able to bring something positive to the table. Good night, and thank you very much, Belize and Belizeans abroad and at home.
Good night.
Right.
Mr. Wade.
Good night to our viewers, listeners, both at home and abroad, and again, we welcome Sharon again with us once more, and you know, welcome you guys. And it's always a pleasure to be sitting in your company, right? And we always start our program, with a prayer and a word. So I'll continue in Jeremiah, uh, chapter 30, 16 to 24. It says, "Therefore, all who devour you shall be devoured, and all your foe, every one of them, shall go into captivity. Those who plunder you shall be plundered, and all who prey on you will be made a prey. For I will restore health to you and your wounds I will heal, declares the Lord, because they have called you an outcast. It is Zion for whom no one cares. Thus saith the Lord, behold, I will restore the fortunes of the tents of Jacob, and have compassion on his dwelling, on his dwellings. The city shall be built on its mound, and the palace shall stand where it used to be. Out of them shall come songs of thanksgiving, and the voice of those who celebrate. I will multiply them, and they shall not be few. I will make them honored, and they shall not be small. Their children shall be as they were of old, and their congregation shall be established before you, before me, and I will punish all who oppresses them. Their prince shall be one of them, their one of themselves, sorry. Their ruler shall come out of their midst. I will take him, I will make him draw near, and he shall approach me. For who would dare of himself to approach me, declares the Lord. And all shall be my people, and I will be your God. Behold, the storm of the Lord wrath has gone forth, a whirling tempest. It will burst upon the head of the wicked. The fierce anger of the Lord will not turn back until he has executed and accomplished the intention of his mind. In the later days, you will understand this. That's my reading from Jeremiah 30:16 to 24.
Amen.
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 Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank you, Mr. Wade, Mr. Brackett. Can you follow truth with a prayer, please?
Yes, sir. Oops. Okay. Divine loving Father, as we come before thy presence once more, we pray that thou mayest hearken unto our supplications and our requests for thy divine guidance and presence among us as we try to do some basic community service on behalf of our country, Belize. We pray that thou mayest continue to guide and protect us, be with us, strengthen us, bless our family members, each and every one of them, wherever they are, you know them by name and number. Bless the rest of our country, its people, and its leadership, and guide us as we do this undertaking tonight. For we ask this mercy in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you.
I thank you, Mr. Brackett. Good
Thank you
night
much.
again to the people at home and abroad. We had a special edition of Belizean Affairs yesterday, and importantly, we were discussing if Belizeans have the fundamental rights to vote or not. Now, as my cousin had mentioned before, we have a learned man in Mr. Dickie Bradley, who is also teaching to the Belizean people the fundamental rights of the Constitution. But apparently, Mr. Bradley has mentioned in his teaching that we, the people, does not have a fundamental right to vote. I, for one, does not believe him because when I read Section 1 of the preamble, Part A, it tells you that you have the right to vote.
Amen.
Likewise, I listened to Mr. Ed Osha, who is also specifying that the Belizean Constitution was amended in Section 2. And when he mentioned that, I look back to what happened with Section 3 of the Eighth Amendment that the Barrow regime was trying to pass some years ago, and only to end up with a ruling by Judge Leal that stated that certain parts was null and void. But yet the government has yet to remove these null and void portion from the Constitution. A prime example is Section 69(9),
Mhm.
where they were trying to give themselves the sole power to make any laws
And
and
interpret.
to amend the Constitution as they wanted.
Mhm.
And with doing that, they were trying to say that the people would have no judicial review under Section 20. They wanted to completely take that away, as well as your referendum right, which protects you. With that said, I would like to go to Ms. Spitz to hear what she would have to say on that. And I thank you for
Uh,
your participation tonight.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
uh, can I ask if Ms. Spitz would allow me to set the stage for the discussion?
Yes,
I won't do the whole thing. I'll just do a little part enough so that she can piggyback on
yes,
with her explanation or input
of
on the
course.
matter. But I just want to preface the matter again, if you don't mind. Is that all right with you, Mr. Chairman?
Ye- yes, you can. Follow by that. You can just go ahead and call on her,
Uh-huh.
and then we proceed by that. Go ahead, sir.
So, okay. First of all, I want to raise the volume on this thing and I'll leave just to make sure.
People is going to open your eyes. You don't have a constitutional right to vote. You must have a constitutional right to vote.
Attorney Richard Dickey Bradley was the main presenter today. Bradley sought to break down his
Um,
lecture in simple
I'll,
terms,
I'll stop
using
at that part
relatable
in
examples
terms of
to
what I was
increase
trying to.
participants' knowledge.
I just wanted to get that one statement in from the good learned gentleman and my friend, former Attorney General Mr. Dickey Bradley, because that is the contention or the point of contention that we're going to be dealing with tonight. And in so doing, I had just a second, 1
Of
minute.
the Constitution. Look at this.
Um, man, okay, there it is. Okay, the Belizeans' rights to vote. The following commentary response was made by Leonard Brackett as a retort to an incorrect statement by lawyer senior counsel Mr. Richard Dickey Bradley as regards to Belizeans' constitutional rights to vote. On the 19th of August 2023, Venerable Lawyer Senior Counsel and former Attorney General of Belize, Mr. Richard Dickey Bradley, said, as you all have heard from the thing that I played just now, but this is in writing now, the very same thing, we don't have a constitutional right. When he said a we, he's referring to Belizeans. We don't have a constitutional right to vote. And I added there a double exclamation because it was so outrageous, it was so highly irregular. He went on to say, we must have a right to vote. As in other words, we are only going to get our rights to vote if we follow through on this constitutional process that they are undertaking which then would legitimize and give us or grant us what is already ours by virtue of being born Belizeans, or right to vote. And I went on to well, I left out the rest of what he was saying, and I went on to say, being part of a speech he was giving to an audience of the Belize Coast Guard personnel, being done as part of the education campaign by the People's Constitution Commission, PCT, of Belize. All Belizean citizens have a constitutional right to vote, and citizens of the Commonwealth who resides in Belize are vested with the right to vote in Belize's election, as propounded by the following citations. And I won't cite them right now because I need to yield back to Ms. Pitts, to whom I ask the favor for me to just set the pace. Later on, when my turn to talk comes, then I'll go into the rest of this, So out of basic decency, I just have to yield back the floor because it wasn't my time to talk. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Pitts, for yielding. Back to you,
Okay,
Ms. Pitts.
that's a very, very interesting question, right? I would have loved to have been able to, I can't find the provision I was looking at, but let me see how I will approach this, right? With respect to the right to vote, I believe you nailed it in the head that it is within the Constitution of Belize. The very supreme law of Belize is section chapter 4, the Belize Constitution. Now, the way the Constitution is framed, and this is why we have to be
the citations will be coming later on, as I said. I'll bring those forward when my turn comes.
But this is something I will treat and try to, I don't know, rise to the challenge. Basically, when you look at the Constitution, 1, supreme law. 2, some may say, well, you know what? You have what is just a preamble, and they're just aspirational declarations. But in my view, the very preamble, the preambular provisions of the Constitution present the mindset, the framework, the intent, the spirit of the Constitution, that which buttress the Constitution, and it ought to be brought alive by you will have further on some sections which specify, make specific rights. What we would say they are scripted or they are written literal. But don't think you would say you can then say, well, you know what? There are discrete provisions. And then beyond that, as the Constitution requires policies of state, and I'll go to a reading of that, which give really present it and afford the protection. I think too often the review discussion of the Constitution is being made. I believe we hear notions of looking at it to this right to the extent that it's not limited by, and then we look to statutes as giving the right. Now, the statute might prescribe the mechanism, and it might seem to confer the right to vote, and so we might have had statutes passed. Quickly, I think what I haven't seen done, and maybe I wasn't privy to presentation, is that a quick indication, description has to be given by the hierarchy of all law sources, so to speak, the ranking, so that for Belize, following on the common law, constitutional Westminster parliamentary system, the rule of law system as opposed to the civil, what we have in common law is that, and it's throughout the Commonwealth of England, as we call it, with some other places adopting some of our some features which are intrinsic in our constitution and which are the hallmarks and set us apart is that you look to law. So basically, if you look at sources, you might see treatises and textbooks. You would see precedents.
Mm-hmm.
You would see treaties, conventions, agreements signed internationally between our government and others, whether they're bilateral, regional, or accession or from we scarcely promote, but it could be accession or ratification of international treaties. And treaties,
Mm-hmm.
TREATIES, distinct from TREATISES, the plural of what would be maybe seminal books or dissertations which are by certain authorities. So you
Treatise and
have,
treatise.
right,
Treatise and treatise. That
yes.
is the combination of a legal document of a perspective or philosophy compared
Yes,
to the treaties or agreements that you make between
as
persons or
between
nations.
sovereign countries, yes,
Right.
or countries which are under some other, not yet independent or some other status, no, which by extension of law, the mother countries might extend.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, when you look at it, constitution rank the highest. So when we say constitutional supremacy, what comes under the constitution? Then you would have statutes, acts or decrees by parliament. And that is why we would say, my elders would tell you, I would have heard this long before I started formal study of law. Those other countries, then people rule by decree. They would say one dictator comes in or one president and it's under his hand, so it's by decree. So by the whim and there's an overthrow or succession and everything goes out. In our country, we have constitutions which are meant to be of permanence, and the constitution protects people, it protects the state, it protects itself by entrenching itself and its provisions, but most importantly, and we went over the basic structure doctrine to a certain extent last time. And all these things are still introductory, but we do it in the time constraints. So you have the constitution, you have acts of government or statutes passed by parliament, the law, you have the separation of powers, the judiciary, the executive, and the administrative, and the judiciary, the executive, and what's the other one? The legislative. So sometimes people would say, well, the waters mix because you'd find your executive minister is also a member of parliament. But for all intents and purposes, the separation of power is what reigns in tyrants, reigns in mistaken, vindictive ministers of the country. It reigns in the government itself. So even though it has this, I believe you gentlemen have referred to it as a super majority. So it has this 3/4 majority, which the people in the electoral process has vested in it to be able to amend the constitution to a certain extent.
Right.
We still say that the constitution, insofar as they derogate from the constitution reigns them in and the constitution reigns supreme. And I will say it's so beautiful that if one man's right is affected by the constitution and the whole rest of Belize voted for a tyrant or felt comfortable to give a majority the vote and the rest remain silent, and you might say, well, you had your say, but the majority has its way, etc. One person's right cannot be taken away from. And this is the beauty of the Constitution, why we have to protect it, because the Constitution protects itself. I'm repeating, it protects the country, defines the country, it protects our rule of law, system of government, or people. And guess what? For those who will want to change and experiment with the Constitution protects the institutions of government as well.
Right.
so that when the people step up, the people are to a certain extent made to understand that one, well, God over us, and then two, you have a constitutional dictate so that we go through rule of law processes. So let me get back. So you have the constitution, you have the statutes or laws or acts of parliament. And remember, an act of parliament is not given effect until after it gets the assent of the governor general. But before that, we have a bicameral legislature so that it goes to the first house and then it goes to the second house, which can veto, but traditionally they tend to pass through after arguments, debates, and so on. And then for the governor general's assent. Once it's in keeping with law or that assent is usually a formality. But what we have is a very, very
Yeah.
intrinsic, to be zealously guarded system of checks and balances. Though
Very
you know
robust.
I have taken pains to say all this when you've asked me a simple, straightforward question about voting. I'll get into a little historical context before I get back into the Constitution. Remember what Dr. Abigail was saying, and we must look to our history sometimes, right? Because Belize has walked forward and stepped back, and we walk almost sometimes like crab. No? So here we are with a constitution, and sometimes I feel it came to me like we're the dog crossing over the bridge and looking in the mirrored waters and about to not even understand what it is we're protected by, and looking to open our mouth. And I don't know if dog going to eat with supper. Maybe I'm too frail and so on when it comes to this suasion and this rigid, almost it's like a command in a way to say, you know what, this better phone, so take this. So getting to the point, remember with Belize, we had our first constitution, which was Burnaby's Code at St. George's Key. And that was homegrown in 1765.
That is part of my presentation for tonight too.
Oh, great. So I'll leave
All
you
of
to
that
come
is
back to
covered.
that.
I
And we are
went there.
going
I went.
towards the
I went
celebration of the 10th
before
of
that.
September and Battle of St. George's Key. So in
All of that
short
is coming.
then, we had all people voting. So although we would have been under Mother England, for some reason and good reason, the people of the Bay of Belize, and I call the Bay men, black men, white man, master, slave, free man, key man,
Mm-hmm.
man and
Yeah.
woman. So when the British were sending Despard's code or Despard to set up a codification, we receive law, that's what you call in the sources, and in another way, a part of your law is received. So as a part of the British, being a British settlement protectorate, we receive the law as a settlement. Nevertheless, this band of unruly, ungovernable people in British Honduras, well, a settlement in the Bay of Belize, at St. George's here, they sent back their spot and they said, and I'm not giving it a parallel to say anything negative about the Constitution. I'm just saying we have sojourned, we have trailblazed, and I like this word. It's a beautiful word. Or imprimatur, the Belizean imprimatur, that thing which has branded us, fire branded throughout history, our patrimony, our people, right? To say that, you know what, this country, we have taken our journey through the vicissitudes and contingencies, but we've steered. We're hanking dola. Anybody who know sailing know how that man get pan a boat and he hanking dola pan a sunlighter. So we have this continued journey. But a journey means sometimes, you know what? You know when to batten down. And you have to remember your compass, right? And know you'll get tossed on the sea. You have to know how to hold on to sight of land, being on land, or sometimes you say, you know what, I not set sail at all because it's a weather when you really should stay on course. That said, move forward. So we had one of the most evil institutions, slavery instituted on us, but it's a part of our history too. You had free blacks, you have enslaved blacks for the most part, and a white minority, Bokraman, as we would have said, the settlers, right? People used to dance Jankuno against, right? So, and that's very Creole, right? As in the Caribbean and from Africa, the Gumbe. So basically, what you had then is pull forward. Remember, we had a system of public meetings, which was our de facto parliament. And it was in the open, St. George's Key. When you look in the context after Saint-Domingue or Haiti declared itself a state from the French, the revolution, we believed what 1765 our constitution. Am I right with that, or was it 1865? Tell me, Mr. If I slip with the century, but
1765. That's
1765. Sorry,
you know.
did I say that correct?
Yes.
Yes, you did.
Okay, good, wonderful. I want to be very precise with things like that, right? So 1765, and you notice that is even ahead of the Battle of St. George's Key. So what it underscores for us, and our history will not be denied, that by 1798, 1797, 1st of June, when the public meeting was held and our parliament was then in Belizean, right there the courthouses still are, you had the vote. In that era, the qualification for voting was property. And unfortunately, even people were property and cattle and so on, right? But the irony of it was that I think we were blessed by God, all along. I don't think I am assured of that. You know that Black people also held slaves, they held property, cattle, they had land, they had location tickets, they had businesses, mahogany works, logwood works, and so on, right? They had vessels, boats, all the things that were of commerce and settlement and everyday living. Why I'm saying that is when you check the official records, the archives, international and first-hand documentary of the public meeting of parliament in the Bay of Belize, guess what? You will see 1765 and look to 1798. I dare you not to find that a female woman were voting. I dare you not to find that in 1797, June the 1st, you had, perhaps they didn't exercise their franchise much, but when there was that tie, you had 14 men, Adam, William, and the other Caesar Flowers, heading the historically dubbed and the heroes of Flowers Bank, 14. Of those 14, only 2 were white men. So they came down and they voted and they broke the tie and history was made once more. So it was to defend rather than evacuate. So what you had in other places, I think in Australia and perhaps even England and other places, you didn't have the ability for Blacks to exercise the franchise. And one time, some media said otherwise. Blacks couldn't vote because they were slaves. And I don't normally call media houses. That came to my ear, and I felt as a citizen, a patriot, and as somebody saying that our people's history will not be denied. I had a call to call and say, look at the history. I didn't get a response in the call, and I left messages as to specifically what it was. Why I say that that is important, because in Australia, if you look at the suffragette movement in Australia and maybe England, you might see with respect to women about 1919, right? And then maybe in England it was some other time, right? But we reach back, I'm saying to even women who would talk about women's rights. We tend not to indicate and share in beliefs that we can teach the world, and we have taught the world an example long ago, and we can boast our women and remind our men that we were always there in that partnership, not to derogate from. While they protect, we are the ones who help to boost. So I say that because then, we go into this public meeting, a de facto parliament, and then we go into Battle of St. George, then we have our coat of arms again, and then 1823, and then we wind our way historically till we get Crown Colony and self-government again, right? And it's for protection, and we continue. That has been our history, and if that is what has preserved us, the lessons must not be thrown away. And those who have ears to hear will understand what builds our intuition, right? That you cannot learn in a university, right? It's in our blood and our veins. Why I take the time to say all this is that by the time you look at universal adult suffrage in British Honduras, and then the 18-year-old vote and so on, like you see the different formulaic changes, right? But if you want to reach back, you reach back. So now then, when we have our constitution, we have that preamble, and it does say, or chapter 5, and we're not to overlook it, and some constitutional experts will say that you look to the preamble. When I did my clinic project in University Costa Rica and University of Florida, Universidad de Costa Rica, 2003, with respect to the Belize Barrier Reef, which is a UNESCO cluster, 7 individually inscribed, clustered as a World Heritage Site, but each of them. So we have a cluster. I was looking at certain things, and Costa Rica. If you find I'm boring or I'm going too much, I don't want.
I was just
it's
about to say.
very
Costa
educational. Go
Rica
ahead.
actually is a
Sarah?
civil law country, but
Sarah, just a
yes.
second, please. I was just about to try and remind you. Well, I don't think you had known, because you wasn't privy to our last meetings that we had, and that is that we have to try and maintain the whole program under 1.5 hour.
Okay, good.
And so therefore, we will have to come back around like I did earlier when I said asking
yes,
for that permission to just say that piece to to preface what we were going to be dealing with. Then after I get my second turn, then you might get another turn. Greg might get a turn.
Then.
And we have
then
to go back and
you
forward.
want me to come back to this, remind me, please?
Right. So all of us get a chance, because the time is going to run out on us, and some of us may not get to, as much as.
Before you do, Miss Page.
Yes.
Before you do, Miss Page, I would like you to finish right there in section 5 of the Constitution.
When you say section 5, what do you mean, part 5?
You were starting to say something about.
Oh, I was saying chapter 4, the Belize Constitution. So I was saying quickly that Costa Rica had to create that a civil law country, a 4th constitutional sala to protect the environment, right? And grant a right to a clean and healthy environment and a corresponding duty to preserve it. Now, when I looked at the Belize Constitution, I looked at the preamble, and it included policies of state which protect the environment. So I had to use that as the legal handle. Now, getting back to the Constitution per se, I see right at chapter 4 under the preamble, and I'm looking at my old print. Now I don't have my computer isn't working. So I'm using the phone for the phone, and it say that believe that whereas the people of Belize, and you might have read it already last week, no? So then I can leave that, but they believe that the will of the people shall form the basis of government in a democratic society in which the government is freely elected by universal adult suffrage, and in which all persons may, to the extent of their capacity, play some part in the institutions of national life, and thus develop and maintain due respect for lawfully constituted authority, right? And then you have others going on, right? So the will of the people. I will start right at that preamble. How do you test the will of the people or get them to participate, right? Then we would go on later to see the representation of the People's Act and other parts of the Constitution, right? So I don't know if you were pointing me to 5. Sorry.
No, what happened? You had made reference to section 5 or subsection 5,
Section 4,
and that's what
third
Gregory
part,
apparently
chapter
locked
4.
into. But
I see.
it was actually intended to intimate part cap 4 of our
Yes,
constitution as the
yes,
best reference for what you was intimating.
yes,
And it's just a little mix up there just now, but that's all right.
yes. Thanks.
Back to you, Mr. Chairman. Sharon is waiting. She finished.
I thank you for that, Miss Bates. I would like to say this before I go to Mr. Will. Every Belizean citizen has a fundamental right to vote. If you look even within the European Union Charter, section 39 and 40,
Mm-hmm.
it is mentioned that all their people has the fundamental right to vote. Not to forget that the United Kingdom was also under the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as me saying that, I would like to say this. If it is the belief of the educators, the people who is teaching us, the public, about the fundamental rights, section 3 through 19 of the Constitution, if you are saying that we don't have the right to vote, then why is the government coming to us? Why is the government coming to us when he can simple, as the Prime Minister said, use parliamentarian vote to turn Belize to a republic?
Please, sorry. And your section 73 has a discrete statement. Save as otherwise provided in its constitution, all questions proposed for decision in either house shall be determined. This is a members voting. So you have even the members of parliament having the right to vote, right? Okay.
But they can
That
exercise
is
that vote
correct.
before we give them that authority by our vote, which is the part that they're trying to bypass. They cannot
I
exercise their vote in
believe,
parliament without us voting them into parliament. It's a fundamental premise. And
I,
sorry.
I believe, right? There's a misconception when it comes to educating the public. We live in a democracy,
It's
and
designed.
in order not to have fraud, the individuals who are teaching the Belizean public about the fundamental rights, who are speaking out of context as to your right to vote,
Mm-hmm.
is simply stating this as a fact because we have an election and boundaries commission who deals in that to make sure that we do not have fraudulent election. This is why you go and you register. In a democracy, you do not want to have citizens voting 1, 2, 3, 4 times. So if they are teaching that you don't have a fundamental right to vote, only to say that is why you have to go and register, I think something is really wrong with them when it comes to educational wise and educational purpose. Mr. Wade.
I listened attentively to Miss Pitts. She laid, she laid a groundwork there, and she read truth, right? As it's supposed to be. Um, Gregory, I fully agree with you. I'm along the same line in terms of where these so-called presenters, right, that that is going out to so-called educating the public, right, and we talk about the right to vote, right, and you talk about the election and boundaries, right. Um, I think that from Jump Street, these people, they have an agenda, right? Like I said before.
Mhm. That's the
Um,
problem.
I say this because you says that, and we've been saying that the truth is not being told, right? For me, I call it simply it's a trickery, because what they're saying they're doing for the public is not what they really want to do. That's not their intention.
Mhm.
That won't be the end game for them, right? We side, like I said before, we side creeping up. We talked about it. It's creeping up. You see in that on that questionnaire, they have their intention. I would have never believed that they would have brought it out so boldly in terms of, do you want to have a get rid of the governor general and in place with a president, right? I mean, to me, that's a trickery, right? And that is one of their intention. And I go back to see, why is it that if I want to vote for, say, Miss Spitz, and I live here in the west and she is down south, she's contesting an election, right? Why can't I, go and vote for Miss Spitz? Why do I have to vote for that individual in that area, in my area? Where is the right to vote? Where is the freedom, right? I mean, I see that's a gross violation of the people's right, right? And when they talk about, yes, we do have right to vote, uh, um, in my view, we don't have right to vote because, like I just draw a scenario. Suppose I want to vote for Miss Spitz and she is contesting in the south. I cannot because I have to vote in the area that I live in, right? So that's a hole that they have on the voting populace. So and all these things, has to be amended. I would like to see that I do the weird, you know, should be able to vote any part of Belize that I want to vote, and for for whoever that I want to vote for, right? That should be my God-given right, right? So I say this to say that, you know um, this whole tampering with the Constitution, right? I've said before that I personally have been living with it for decades, and I see nothing wrong with it, right? They need to strengthen it. I mean, I've said before, what I would like to see, but they would not come to the public and say, well, what would you like to put in the Constitution? You don't hear that. They're ramming that stuff down the people's throat, right? You know. So if they would have come to say, well, like educating the public, or go to Corozal, have an audience, what would you like to see change in the Constitution, right? For me, if I was there, I would say, like, number one, I would like to see we have elected senators, and I've said that before, right? There's nothing wrong with that, you know. Right now we have appointed senators, and you see we see the chaos that these people do in the House. Some partisan people, agree with what they do, but for the most, the public out there do not agree with the way they handle the people's business, right? I, for one, do not like some of the things that they do, right? In terms of burden this country with with the debt that they have this country in, right? The borrowing and the borrowing and the borrowing, right? That's something I would like to see, that we have elected senators instead of appointed. That's what I would like to see in the Constitution. And I say, lastly, I would like to see them enshrine in the Constitution that we must pass UNCAC, right? And if we don't, the next government or the next figurehead that sits should, not shall, should pass UNCAC, right? So these are some of the things that I see wrong with the whole scenario in terms of this Constitution, so-called educating the public about the rights of the people, your rights, which is totally not true, totally not their agenda, right? They have a different agenda. So it's all about trickery, right? And I hope and pray that the Belizean people are beginning to see what they are doing when they go to these different municipalities, right? And through this medium, I glad that we have the energy and the will, and like with people like Miss Pitts, Leonard, and Gregory, we try to educate the people, right? And we try to show them what these people are trying to do with our Constitution, okay? And it's all about truth. Go ahead, back to you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank you, Mr. Wade. I will be one of the first to tell you, I believe the government have ways of achieving its agenda. I would like to ask the people at home and abroad, who all remember just before the referendum or during that period when you had to register to vote, when you went to vital statistic, your information was gone. And you had to come up with a new identity.
That had happened to me. I experienced that, Gregory, right? All along, I was a voter. I was a Belizean. And because I was vocal to a no to the ICJ, I was disenfranchised. They couldn't find where I was born. I was not a Belizean, and I wasn't able to participate. I'm just one out of those thousands, right? That was disenfranchised, living proof, right? So you're very right on that. They'll find a way to get rid of you.
No,
and
I'm not saying this.
After that had finished, they found my, right? I was able to go and apply for a birth paper, and I got one. Ironic, right? So
I'm not saying that just to say it, because you have a lot of Belizeans who father was not married to their mother but still signed their birth paper, only to find that when they went back, the people working there was telling them your mother and your father was not married, so you have to do a depot and change your name to your mother's name. How crazy! And it's still going on.
Because
a lot of individual people.
To other people.
Right.
That's basically what happens. I've investigated it deeply, and I had enough records that I could have taken to the Senate. Your mic is off, Sharon. Sharon, your mic was off. I don't know. Your mic is off, Sharon. That's why. But anyhow, I need to continue. Sorry.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes.
No,
Okay.
all right.
I'm not hearing well.
It's all right. No, you're back on.
You hear us, Sharon?
Mr.
Are
Chairman,
you
go
hearing
ahead.
us?
Mr. Chairman.
I'm hearing no, but it's very low.
Very low. Okay. Maybe step up a little closer, maybe, or we'll speak a little louder.
Sorry, who has the floor now?
Gregory.
Okay.
I will. I will go. What you didn't hear just now, Ms. Fitz, I was referring to the people who was disenfranchised around the time of the referendum,
Yes.
somewhere in that area, who was told they had to register to vote, only to find when they went to vital statistic, bingo, they couldn't find their birth paper, or some of them had to lose the name that they were carrying and had to do the poll and end up with their mother names. I mean, we have a government or governments who do all kind of mischief to achieve their agenda.
Mhm.
But with that said, like I said before, if this government believes that we do not have the right to vote, why is he teaching us through third party the fundamental rights? Just simply go ahead and use his parliamentarian votes to achieve his agenda. And let's see what happens. Let's see how strong our constitution really is under the referendum act. I could guarantee you that the government of Belize will never try that because that is not how he intends to establish his ideals. He wants to use us, the people, by turning us into sovereign citizens. And at the end of the day, when it is all done, you know who the blame will come to if it don't work out? They will say, you, the people, is the one who wanted to change it. And this is why I need us as Belizeans to continue educate the people and continue to tell them about their fundamental rights. We need to let them know the government is teaching you about fundamental rights, but they do not want to teach you about the protection of those rights through the basic structure. They don't want to teach you that they cannot touch that. That is why they're coming to you, asking you to give up your rights. Mr. Brackett,
Uh, just a second, please. Earlier, when I asked Ms. Spitz to give me a chance to preface, I stopped off at a certain point, hoping to get back to elucidate further when my turn came, and now I'm going to proceed with that. All Belizean citizens have a constitutional right to vote, and citizens of the Commonwealth who reside in Belize are vested with the right to vote in Belize election, as propounded by the following citations, and I'll go and cite them. Number one, the Belize Independence Constitution, generally known as or short titled as Belize Constitution, effective as of 21st of September 1981. 1A, the preamble of the said Constitution. Citizens' people's rights, paragraph C, E, and F, etc. Those are just the citations. The reading, we did some of those reading last week, and at some other future occasion, if not tonight, some other time we might get to read them. Section 85 of the Belize Constitution as well, Section 90, subsection 1 and subsection 2, and Section 91 and 92 and 93, dealing with the franchise to vote. It's all in our Constitution, all over the place, from the preamble to the different sections, subsections, and paragraphs. And I do not understand how some of our legal minds, especially prominent ones, then could make these kind of errors and declare that we don't have a constitutional right when it's right there in the Constitution in so many different areas. 1B, I read that just now. 1C, Representation of the People's Act, Cap 9, says shall apply to the franchise. I don't know what franchise they think or understand the Constitution is referring to when it makes mention about or franchise to vote, which is what empowers the government or give the government the opportunity to win the amount of seat during the election for them to constitute the government, to turn around and tell us that we don't have a right. How the hell they got there then if we didn't have a right and we didn't exercise that right? It's just a game. Item number 2, I'm going to bring back part of what Sharon was mentioning earlier about the historical references to how we exercised our rights even long before the Constitution was given to us. Item number 2, Honduras be a settlement. Management meetings by landed gentry tenured rights at St. George's Key Settlement Administration Capital. Those people used to vote in those days, have their meeting among themselves, and cast their vote because they all were perceiving their administration and management of their properties under the old English common law. Number 3, the Flowers Bank 14 and Belize City vote to fight the Spaniards on June 1st of 1778 AD, which also showed that we had self-management under the basis of people voting to decide among themselves how their prerogative is going to be run. So from back then, we were exercising democracy. Number 4, British Honduras Bray Protectorate territory, because before we became a colony, we were a British Protectorate territory, which then subsequently became a colony under British governance. I'll reach out on the next item. British Honduras be a protectorate territory with self-government, magistrates, management under Barnaby's codes, laws, rules, etc., with public meetings and voting rights. From way back then, even before the United States was having their congresses, before the United States had its independence, as a matter of fact, Belize was already exercising democracy. As Sharon mentioned the last time she was on the show, the British common laws go back 1,000 years. So we were blessed to have that as our guiding force as we came along through our own history. British Honduras be a colony. This is when we became a colony. Under British colonial rule, as Sharon referred to earlier, Mr. Despard, who was killed for alleged seditious activities while he was acting in the capacity as a governor on behalf of the UK. Under British common law, with landed gentry tenured voting rights. Way back in those days, people used to be voting and making their decision. Even the British, before we became a colony, the magistrates them were complaining that the people in the country were a bunch of rebel rosas and they would not follow the rule of law. And they had a right to their own dictates, and they could not be, brought under no kind of military jurisdiction when they wanted to use the military forces against them. Number 6, British Honduras colony under universal suffrage declarations with voting rights for all adults of majority age during the early 50s. 1964, self-government decrees, laws empowering citizens and government to self-determination. All of that was done by virtue of your right to vote. It was the right to vote that gave the power to the people that won the elections for them to constitute the Congress and then manage our affairs. And out of those that became the majority in Congress, who then start wielding the powers of governance as cabinet members. Number 7. Okay, I'll go to number 8. Basically, number 8 is a detour as above, going back to the items as I had mentioned earlier. Let's see. Let me see. Just a second, please. Okay. And then number 1. And since time is running so fast, I don't know if we'll have the time to read them through or take them out of the Constitution and read them to you. But at least we have the citations here. For those who have a Constitution, and for Mr. Dickey Bradley, who made the mistake, and I'm sure he has a Constitution, and Mr. Usher, they all have a copy of the Constitution, and they are teaching the Constitution. They could hopefully go and review to see if these citations are correct. So I'll just read the citations in the interest of time. The Belize Independence Constitution, generally known as, or short title as, Belize Constitution, effective as of the 21st of September of 1981. The preamble: Citizens/People's Right, paragraph C. I think in the interest of specifically letting the Constitution speak for itself, I think I should read that part. Just give me a second. I just want to read that. The public needs to know where these things are coming from, and therefore I need to read that one. It's a public benefit program, and the public must be at ease in being able to know and understand that they're not being taken for granted, or that we're not just pulling a fast one and just saying things that doesn't go the way we are saying it. Read section C. We, the people of Belize, believe that the will of the people shall form the basis of government. Sharon read this earlier. In a democratic society in which the government is freely elected. How they are freely elected? By you exercising your right to vote, not the government giving you a right that you were not entitled to, or they want you just to vote and give you that privilege to vote because they want you to vote for them. It is your prerogative to exercise your right to vote for whoever you so choose. Is freely elected by universal adult suffrage, and in which all persons may, to the extent of their capacity, play some part in the institutions of national life, and thus develop and maintain due respect for the lawful constituted authority. And E, requires policies of state which protect and safeguards the unity, freedom, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Belize, which eliminates economic and social privileges and disparity among the citizens of Belize, whether by race, ethnicity, color, creed, disability, or sex, which ensures gender equality, which protects the right of the individual to life, liberty, basic education, basic health, and the right to vote in elections. What it says? Right. Not privilege only, right to vote. So when our learned friend, Mr. Dickey, is saying, you don't have a right to vote, stick one finger in your ears and pretend you never hear what he said. Because he's not comporting to what the Constitution is telling you here right now in its preamble, which authorizes and grants the power for the rest of the citations. And as I said earlier, there are many citations that I could have read just as well. I can't read them in the interest of time because the program, is going to finish in a few minutes' time. But I want to finish read the last part of the thing that I was reading before I decided to read that constitution, so people can hear it for themselves. Look for it in the own constitution and read it for yourself. Not take what I tell you for granted. Uh, After the preamble, it also stipulates in section 85, subsection 1, and sections 90, subsection 1 and 2, and section 91 and 92 and 93, as referring to the franchise to vote that is given to be controlled under the referendum, not the referendum, given by the Elections and Boundaries Department, to make sure that people have access to exercise their right. That is to enumerate the people and to decide the different department boundaries. And one more last thing I would like to say just before I yield back. Presentation of the People's Act, Cap 9, states that your rights to vote shall apply to the franchise. And when it speaks about franchise, it's speaking about your right to vote. So much for that for right now. Back to you, Mr. Chairman. Back to you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know. I think your mic
ahead,
is
Greg.
muted. Somebody's mic was muted just now.
I thank you. I thank you for your reading and how you
Welcome, sir.
express to the people. As I said also, the people of Belize, at home and abroad, needs to read up on the Constitution so they can learn their fundamental rights by themselves.
Mhm.
Because, as you're saying, Ms. Spitz is saying, and we know, that right is written and enshrined in the Constitution, and it can never be written out of existence. And this is why I personally specify, if the government wants to do constitution reform, let's start by moving over section 1 and section 2, which is the preamble and the fundamental rights, and we go from there. With that said, let me hear you, Ms. Bates.
Okay. What I was trying to look at, I think that when sometimes they say there's no right to vote, it's because I think, and you've made a point, the preamble is not given the sanctity that it has. It's the overarching, it's a foundation stone. It's where you'd look to when anything looks opaque, right? So, for example, we have in a couple constitutions, I think maybe Jamaica and Trinidad, they have it. They might some countries have Bill of Rights, some have a Charter of Human Rights. I think Jamaica has a Charter of Human Rights. But however they are called, you look to the substance of what is stated. So that Jamaica might refer to the right to vote as a human right per se. But if a right to vote is in our preamble, it doesn't weaken it, right? I think that what happens is that when we read on, you might see the freedom of movement as a discrete right or right against the privation of personal liberty and freedom of speech, like enumerated or listed. And then for us to go further to see rights to vote, as Mr. Brackett clearly illustrated, you have the representation of the People's Act. Now, in my view, when you look to Constitution, some people might have this perspective and a legal one that if you have it stated discreetly in the Constitution, although you have the preamble, or you still say again the right to vote. Like when I was presenting, I was saying in Guyana has freedom from hunger, right? They have as well freedom to participate in, I think, peaceful demonstration. And you have some others. I mentioned Costa Rica, which even borrowed from our constitutional type system in order to protect the environment. But it seems to me that they, beyond the what are enshrined in the Constitution, they they vote in the will of the people, what is enunciated and described as founding, the common will. They goes back to John Locke, the theory of public trust, right? So those who drafted the Constitution, the type Constitution is infused with that, right? So when you go to the Representation of the People's Act, you have some fetters or limitations. So that I think Mr. Greg, you were mentioning, and Mr. Wade, things like they mess around with, well, you have to reside a certain place, or when they're doing redistricting, or they went from a wholesale, I think, on a UDP to a whole new voter re-registration. So some people were deprived of the franchise. Then the mechanics, administrative, the vital statistics, they had gone through when they went through transcribing or whatever you call it, moving from handwritten or hand type binders to the computerized. There were a lot of mix-up. So that we see, I understand exactly what you're saying, that people had to be told, well, you know what? There was a little gerrymandering too, because people are being told to assume this surname or that surname, and a very casual deed poll. And it was like minister guaranteed, although instead of constitutional oversight and protection. And we do have the, I am saying in a light sense though, right? So that sometimes people meant good, but it was when you deprive somebody of the right to vote because they moved and they didn't get to re-register. If you have it stated away in the Constitution, we could rely on the preamble, A court would uphold that to say somebody has been unconstitutionally deprived of the right to vote. Now, there's another angle that I don't think you all have mentioned, but forgive me if you have, because I couldn't hear at one point, right? I'm hoping you're hearing me. And I like to, might say Golson, but I remember just at the early 90s, Honorable Philip Golson, national hero, was saying that the things that will have the future generations of Belizeans will be Belizean rights. And one of his recommendations was that, you see how after the first constitution, we had the extension of the imperial and so on, and then we had to have an amendment, a beautiful one, for dual nationality. But it seems to me that if the constitution requires these policies of state, then with respect to the representation of the People's Act, why is it that there's this big, vulgar debate, which is a non-debate, non-sequitur, non-following? Why are they bothering to ask us if we think that Belizeans abroad, especially Belizean Americans, should have the right to vote? That is a part of your patria. That's a naval string. It's not about how much remittances you send. And some people say, I was scandalized one time, somebody who was a diplomat, I was admiring her presentation a few months ago on a media, until she said, well, it's like I live in a state and state to state, I might not be able to vote. There was something like that, but this is not municipal or state, this is national. And just like wherever you are, you're not fullius nullius, a nice Latin for you're not a child of none, devoid of a country. So just as when you're in the Belize, you can vote if you're an American at the embassy here. In a Belizean should be able to vote at whatever embassy abroad. And now we also have the modern mechanism, the electronic mechanism. So I believe if I was to discuss and analyze the right to vote, I think this is what I would want to strengthen and emphasize. And I am of the view that it can be put right in the representation of the People's Act. Well, remember that is a statute. So maybe Mr. Bradley would be of the view, you know what? Put it directly in the Constitution. But remember, in the Constitution, we have dual nationality, a Belizean abroad, a Belizean born of parents or grandparents.
Mhm.
It's not, it's birthright, it's not a privilege. So that is not your right to vote, although it's already in the Constitution. But twin to that, another avenue is that that's part and parcel of your citizenship. You carry that with you. And it's not that it's a big exercise. The government has all the machinery, all the resources of state to set that up. And that should not be denied. I have one caveat though, or more a question. With what might have been a bucket sale or bucket load or vat load or tanker load of passports, have you diluted without right or citizenship? They might have some passport carrying convenience of state citizens. Mind you, when you confer citizenship, people might say, one man said, you know what? You know, have two class of citizen, you're not a half a Belizean or not. But there's a thing called, and you know what? I'm a lawyer there, and this man is saying that, and there's an intuition that this is a vexed proposition by a Belizean board. And I had to apologize to my mother and elder. She said, why didn't you tell them one birthright is birthright, you're born here, or of generations further from a born Belizean? It's the other thing when the people get the passport, that the privilege. And that's why you could consider a person persona non grata or say, you know, this, that subject. So the right to vote can be reflected and strengthened right in the representation of the people. The government has the
Sha-
instruments of state to pass the legislation in the House. We have
Sharon,
been saying a lot of us for decades,
that is what they use.
91 to now, 30 odd years.
That is what they
Belizeans
use.
abroad have the right to
Okay.
vote. They participate, some of them. We carry the culture, represent us abroad, right? And feel for us, cry for us, loyal to us, right? So that we need Belizeans. Belizeans need us. I don't know if I've strayed too far, but I kind of wanted to illustrate it with that.
Sharon, I was wanting to piggyback on what you just said just now. I wanted to say that it is the representation of the People's Act, Cap 9, that the Barrow administration as well as the Musa administration used to try and disenfranchise the Belizeans abroad. They tampered with the representation of the People's Act, which is under the purview of the legislator, and they made modifications in that section, and then turn around and try to use those modifications to trump the original constitutional intent under the preamble, as I just read just now, as well as the different citations from the very constitution, you know, 60,
You see, Sharon,
90, 91, 92, 93. It's all in there. But
Sharon,
Mr.
you see,
Mr. One more, last one, Mr. Wade. And what they do is Osha is going around teaching that certain part of the Constitution, if it's too far back in the end part of the Constitution, it shouldn't be constituted as a valid and important part of the Constitution because it's too far back. If it wasn't in the beginning of the Constitution, it's not valid. That's the craziness where the man try to put out there to the people, and the people just swallow it up because they don't know otherwise.
You see the Bill of Rights, which are the core. You see the preamble, how you can harden that and use that. You see the representation of the People's Act, which might say toy with residents, toy with certain things, and you use the word disenfranchised. I know in law sometimes, with respect to certain things, they will say resident or domicile. Now, why don't they say, and domicile is the one which has to do with your permanence of intention and your permanent attachment to the country. So even if you're a resident in the US, Hong Kong,
They call it
Africa, the Far
permanent
East,
resident. That's why they
you
qualify
are
it permanent.
domicile Belizean, unless you have
See,
given up your
see,
Belizean citizenship. But
you
people
see,
don't do
you
that.
see
You
as to
have to
what
do that by a specific act. You
Mr.
can't be deprived of
Sharon,
your
Sharon,
citizenship.
Mr. Weir, me to try contribute on this
Now,
something to you.
the thing is that, sorry,
Sharon,
Mr. Brackett,
Mr. Weir, me to try contribute something just now.
I
They ask to
sorry,
give
I'm.
me chance.
I did try to say the problem is right with what they tamper with the act, right? The problem is with the right to vote and the right to participate, right? Participate. They draw a line there. Belizean American like myself could vote, but to participate, that's the big problem. They want you to give up your U.S. citizenship, right? But that's what they want to do. That's what the
That is
Barrow
illegal
administration
because
did.
then the part of the Constitution which guarantees you dual citizenship, that would be vulgar. That would be
I thank
an
you.
abrogation
I
of
thank
that.
you for
That
that.
is
So,
We've been
invalid.
saying that.
Of
so
course, we'd
Sharon,
strike that down, but I don't know if anybody has
what I'm
challenged
trying to
it.
say is this is what they have a hold on Belizean American, right?
But it's
And
wrong.
we need to educate now the Belizean American of. I hope they would hear this, what you're saying and what we are saying here tonight. Let's say we do have a right to participate, not only to vote. So that's
How
why
is
I've
the
said.
will of the people expressed? How is the will of the
So
individual expressed? Apart from the politician visiting, canvassing, how do you express your will in an even way? One vote
Participation.
per person with
so,
all the rest of Belizean. So you can't say that there's discrimination as between one Belizean and another Belizean. Isn't it the franchise, the exercise of that vote? So then you
Right.
see,
so what is the problem?
it's not a
What is the
problem. It's just
problem?
that they do
The-
not. My view is that there are too many independent-minded Belizeans abroad for the
Fair.
politicians here to handle.
Fair.
And I say that without apology. And
One
another
word.
thing I want to put, right? You notice with this constitution and all laws, right? And I don't mean to be trivial, but they want we play hopscotch while then they play checkers and snakes and ladders. And then internationally, everybody playing chess with Belize, right?
So through this medium here tonight, I call on the diaspora, Belizean Americans, now that want to participate in the electoral process of this country, right? This is your time. Put your name up. Participate in the electoral process in this country. If you want to contest for an area representative for whatever part of this country, you have a God-given right to do so. And they have been tampering with us from the 90s when they disenfranchised people like me to participate in parliament, right? They are so wrong for doing that, right? And they have to be ashamed of themselves.
But you see, when you go to citizenship
Why
and
are
the
you
constitutional
the
protection of
UDP,
the right.
the UDP
Sorry,
and
gentlemen,
the
one of the
PUP?
things I wanted to share now, sometimes people might say, well, the Constitution has a way of protecting itself. I can't emphasize it too much. So sometimes somebody might say, but that thing not spelled out in the Constitution. Why they never gone into detail with that? You know why? Because sometimes you derogate. You ever in our umbrella when it rain and you close the umbrella to protect you better? It might protect your head more. It might stifle you,
So,
right? But the span of the umbrella is such, right?
so this is what I've been fighting for over 10, 15 years now, guys, right? And I call on all those who have had that fear and they were hamstrung by the UDP government and the PUP government. Join us, put your name down. Let them take us to court. We have a winning case, right? And this time around, they will not strong me, right?
Well, Mr. Wade, as an elector, you have the right to hold your government accountable local standing. And Ms. Pitts will be the first to tell you that. That's why you have Section 20. Whenever you feel like your rights are violated, I believe
They've been doing it for some time now and need to stop.
the way the government is trying to achieve its agenda is when it has these third-party platform at home and abroad teaching the fundamental rights, right? But if you listen to the narrative, what they are telling you, they want to know what you want to take out. That's the word right there, Miss Pitts. Because the moment the people say, well, we want to take this out and this out, you know what you are giving them? The drafters, the right to rewrite the whole constitution. And that is what they're after.
Exactly.
That is what they're after.
Cut
And the
and
people.
paste, experiment, call and
Exactly.
pull, take the vote of the people, which they will say, oh, everybody mesmerized by this. I told people it's like a kaleidoscope if you're not careful. You know that thing's so exciting, and then it will be confusing. But if you turn the kaleidoscope, right, and you focus, right, don't you start by saying, shouldn't we start by saying right now we should be protecting the Constitution because it's protecting our country and protecting our citizens and protecting our very rights, and with the doctrines and intents that it's a permanence in terms of the state of Belize, the Constitution itself, and the supremacy of God, the supremacy of the will of the supremacy, subsume the supremacy of the Constitution, right? Or in conjunction with that, the will of the people, the preambular. Isn't that like it's more than poetry, it's more than philosophy. The preamble to my mind, although people would say, well, you have the discrete rights enumerated. You know, courts will uphold the preamble when
Yes,
you run out of certain things, right? A great constitutional lawyer, or even a young man up there on the street, right?
Sharon?
When he get locked up or get black and blue,
Sharon?
where he run to? Yes, sir.
We need to close on the show already. We are past our time.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman. Golly.
Yeah, we're like
I thank
time, you know?
I thank everybody for their input. And as I said, we need to really stay focused on this because that is the catchphrase. What you want to take out. The moment you say that, it will give them, through their draftmen, to rewrite the Constitution. Belizeans better be careful because there's a saying like in sports. When you play basketball, I want to be like Mike or I want to be like Kobe. You know what the word will be? Oh, but I helped to put that in the Constitution, not knowing what the effect will be. I thank each and every one of you sitting virtually with me tonight. At this time, we're at the end of our program, and I can
we could continue
ask
this
you
program
guys
on Friday night when it's constitutional night. We could probably take up the matter a little further, because it wasn't fully trashed out tonight, so and everybody didn't get a fair shot. So Friday night, constitutional hour could be used to further the cause.
Right.
Bring that up.
Well said, Mr. Brackett, but I'm grateful that us on the panel sitting virtually is so so representing of our country and our constitution and what it stands for that we have run out of time, but the vast amount of knowledge that we bring to this platform that we haven't shared with the people yet, we must continue to educate our people in the right way. Let them know, as Ms. Pitts said, the Constitution protects itself. How? Through the basic structure doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have to teach them it over and over and have Ms. Pitts elaborate what we are saying, then that is the road to go. With that said, as a chairman, I would like to say good night as my closing, and I thank you guys for sitting virtually with me.
Thank you, Ms. Pitts, for being a part of this very educational program here tonight. I want to thank you so much, and we welcome you back for to help us
Thank
educate
you.
the nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
Welcome.
Chairman, for
Can
presenting
Night,
such a great program
right,
tonight. Thank you, Ms. Pitts, for gracing us with your presence, and thank you, Mr. Wade, for
Miss
being a
Pitts,
part of
can
our
you hang
regular panelists.
around? Miss Pitts, can you hang around just shortly? I want to say something to you when we go off
Okay.
the air.
Yes.
All right?
But just
Okay.
let me say one little thing quick before we go
Right.
now. I
Mhm.
remember that when I was doing political science and they were asking us when is the revolution and when was blah blah blah. And in writing my paper, I looked at the French Res Nouveau. I don't know if I pronounce it correct, but it's basically something new. So people think that revolutions are noise and bangs and guns and blood. But I always say if you're not defending your country with your brain, you're defending it with your pixie blood. So you remove the old established order and you replace it with something new. And you can have a constitutional revolution with a creature that we don't want if it is that we allow this quiet res novo exercise. It could be a
Leonard, you want to thank
constitutional coup
our
d'etat.
viewers too,
Thanks.
I've been
Last
putting them
word.
up. I've been putting up. I've
Yeah.
been putting up the stuff now, but like I said,
Last
we're running
word,
out of time.
thank to our viewers, yeah,
I've been
that
putting them
tune
up.
into the program, yeah. Thank them
Yeah.
so
I
much for
will
supporting the program. Thank you. May God bless you. Continue to
okay,
support us.
Leonard, go ahead.